Hey everyone, Drew Murray here from D20 Advice, and I would like to have a little bit of a rant to you guys about game balance. Game balance is something that I hear coming up again and again. Questions about challenge rating for monsters and the abilities and spells and special features offered to players at particular levels. This isn't something that I've found great difficulty in coping with myself, but it's something that I see people dealing with, and it's something that I thought I'd talk about. What I propose is that throughout this video, I will be presenting ideas that may be a little bit radical, but essentially don't bother with balance, is the gist of it. Now, what do I mean by don't bother with balance? That doesn't mean that I propose you stick an infinite number of ancient dragons, statted and ruled as they are in the books, against a single first level rogue. That is not what I'm proposing. And that is not what should be read as an abstract of what it is that I'm proposing. What I am suggesting is that the game mechanics of Dungeons & Dragons, specifically 5th edition is what I'll be talking about, but I'll be drawing inspiration from previous editions as well. And this could apply to other editions with some caveats. What I'm proposing is that you could ignore challenge rating and instead consider what would be appropriate for the party. Now, I understand that challenge rating is supposed to establish and help clarify what is and is not appropriate for a party to face off against. However, there are several factors to take into account that challenge rating I don't think covers. There are several instances of people complaining about the challenge rating system in particular and saying that it doesn't accurately reflect the challenge that they have had presented. It's meant to represent a statistical likelihood of success given certain criteria. And so a party going off against an equal challenge will be something that depletes some of their resources and will allow them to continue on after the fact. Some people don't think that this is how a confrontation, a fight, should happen. And challenge rating really only applies to fighting, which is a shame. The challenge rating is basically taking all of the combat bonuses and resistances that a creature has and compares it to the averages of combat bonuses and resistances that the characters would have. And then you would work out how many of those things represent enough of a geometric challenge to the party. As in, when you have 2 of them, is it twice as good? If you have 4 of them, is it 4 times as good? Or is it that once you have 2 of them, that's twice as good? If you have 3 of them, that's 4 times as good? Are you increasing it by powers rather than a straight linear addition system? So how do these things scale? Well, that depends entirely on what you're dealing with. Shush. Just got a notification thing. If you are dealing with simple spearmen, more spearmen is more problems. If you are dealing with a fire-breathing dragon, that is substantially more dangerous, because not only do you have more physical things to fight against, but then you've got all the side effects of that physical thing. The amount of space that it takes up, the fact that it can set things on fire, the fact that it can frighten people and get them to scatter in a supernatural way. These are all factors that, depending on how a game master runs things, drastically affect how the challenge is going to go about. Likewise, a bunch of spearmen in a tight corridor, you're not going to get close. Whereas a bunch of spearmen in an open battlefield, you can rally around them. You can harry round and get them in the back. There are circumstantial issues to take into account with every fight, and that does not directly mechanically impact the challenge rating of a monster, with the exception of traps. Traps don't necessarily involve the environment directly, as in a narrow passageway is not a trap. So how do we handle this? How do we handle challenge rating when there are so many things that can affect challenge rating, that can make challenge rating no longer apply in the right way? A bunch of spearmen are a very easy challenge when you've got free reign and can move about them, but that can easily be made more difficult in a fairly common occurrence, like they are in a tight corridor. Also, if they are tactically minded, then they would seek out situations like that to maximize their effectiveness. So how do we cope? Well, I get rid of challenge ratings. I pay no heed to them, and instead I read the individual entries. I think about what kind of challenge that would pose, and I think, okay, what are the dice rolls that my party are going to need to overcome this, and in what situations? If this was to devolve purely into a fight and go nowhere else, could they survive it? And if the answer is yes, I tend to leave it at that and just go, it'll still be fun. If the answer is no, I then personally calculate how likely is it that they're going to die. Is this a certain doom situation, in which case this is something to maybe put at the end of a campaign, and as something where they have the option to avoid it and it's fairly clear what the danger is first, and then if they want to get involved, they can get involved. If that's not the case, however, and it's not sure if they're going to die, then I might throw it in. I might not. It depends a lot. And this is something that a lot of people have difficulty with, this depends mentality. It depends on so many things. It is more than just numerical criteria. While I have no doubt that sufficiently advanced artificial intelligence could mathematically spit out what is going on. But unfortunately, we are not all machines. We are not programming a computer game. This is one where people, human people, adjudicate situations. Now, something that I enjoyed in the uni system was not finding challenge ratings. There may very well be some that I've just not come across. I've not spent enough time with the uni system, much to my regret. But no matter what creature you had, no matter what abilities you threw at the players of the game of the Unity system, if you're playing Witchcraft or Armageddon, it didn't really take into account of what power level they were and what abilities they had. It was just, this is the thing that they can have as an encounter. This is something that they can come across in the world. These are the abilities that it has, and they just need to deal with it. Dungeons & Dragons gives a lot of leeway with a lot of health and a good defense system and allowing tactics and a very strict method in which creatures and characters can interact with each other during a fight. This is your limiting factor. This is where you have the benefit of the doubt here. If you just see an ancient red dragon and think, I will throw that against the party, I want them to find an ancient massive red dragon. If they decide to go and fight it, and they are first level characters, then you have two choices. You can either establish this as a status quo world. This is a concept that was written about in the 3rd edition Dungeon Master's Guide, I think, or Player's Handbook, one of the two. And it described a world that is as you find it, a status quo. It is where really weak monsters will be in the weak monster area and really strong monsters will be in the strong monster area, but it's not necessarily delineated in such a fashion. It's just you set up the world how you see fit, and it is just as that is. So if the players learn that there is a giant over there wrecking up a town, if they go there, they are fighting a giant as statted up and determined by the Dungeon Master. If it's taken just from the monster manual, then it is whatever power level and challenge rating that giant is. It has whatever resources it says the giant has. So if you are too low power, then best to avoid that. In the types of games of Dungeons & Dragons that people seem to be discussing in certain circles more and more, the kind of drama, storytelling type Dungeons & Dragons, actual role-playing with the role-playing games, combat shouldn't be your prime concern. Yes, it's fun and exciting, and yes, you get to use these cool weapons. Have it. Have combat. Maybe have it in every single session. But don't necessarily have it as the thrust of the story. And so, by that I mean, you've got these first level people, they're facing the ancient red dragon. What does the red dragon do? Breathe fire on them? Why would it breathe fire on them? Think of why it would do these certain things. You, as the Dungeon Master, are playing the character of the ancient red dragon. If you want a mindless beast, then, as stated in the monster manual and described by the narrative fluff mechanics, it won't be a mindless beast. It will have reasons to do things, and it might just ignore people that aren't a threat to it. If it breathes fire on them anyway, or if you have decided that it is now a mindless beast, you've altered some things, which is fantastic. Change things, do it. If you have a giant dragon-like creature that can breathe fire on people, have it breathe fire on people, and it does 10d6 damage, say, and that would be enough to wipe them out. Even if it rolled all ones, wipes out the party. You have the choice. You can either stick with it, status quo world, that is what it does, or you can narratively fudge things. Now, this doesn't mean you bend the rules so that the players don't die. This is you essentially giving them a warning shot, reinforcing how dangerous things are. You can allow them automatic saves on their reflex saving throws, or you could just describe that it fires and just misses. It is deliberately a warning shot, or you describe that everyone's kind of dived for cover and just been singed a little bit, similar to the automatically saving, achieving your saving throw, but instead you are now dictating exactly how much damage is done, not just half of whatever you rolled, and so there's still the chance people might die. You are essentially driving the narrative. You are treating it like in a book or a film. If someone turns a corner and there's suddenly something really dangerous there, the cool and dramatic thing to happen in a story is for them to turn the corner and someone's got a gun pointed right there. If you are the kind of hero of the story, what would happen is you would quickly dodge out the way as a bullet rings past, and then you start tussling for the gun and doing some gun fu stuff. If you're wanting to go for a realism simulator for role-playing games, if that's more your bag, then probably look at some of the older editions of Dungeons & Dragons, like 2nd edition. That would probably be more suitable, but you can still use 5th edition for that, and other editions as well. You can still do it. So the mechanics have basically given you a super heroic character in what you want to be your grounded, realistic world. So how do you handle that? Well, again, you've got this extra buffer of hit points to try and avoid things, super abilities to dodge out the way of damage, so on and so forth. Then you turn a corner and someone shoots you point blank and it's enough to kill you. You can either status quo, kills you, or you arbitrarily dictate something that happens. So it's not necessarily that the characters behave in a superheroic fashion and manage to get their own way out of danger, but an external force intervenes. Deus ex machina. That doesn't mean that a god puts their hand down and moves things around. It doesn't also mean that another better character punches them in the face just as they're about to let off that crossbow bolt that's going to get you in the chest as you're around the corner. It doesn't mean that the mysterious stranger from the bar last week jumps in front of the fire breath with a magic shield that protects everyone and then disappears, never to be seen again. It's not that kind of shoehorned Deus Ex Machina, but a more soft, a casual Deus Ex Machina. So the dragon's fire breath is just like I mentioned before, a warning shot. Instead of missing, it engulfs you all, but it's low heat. Maybe his first breath is a much lower heat breath, and so it's enough to like light some candles or something. It's a really dark, dirty red flame. None of this like bright yellow or white flame that might come out later. It's the initial churnings of it. So that would be an example of Deus Ex Machina. Another thing would be a completely external force to the dragon and the party intervening in some way, rocks falling in the way, a trap door being triggered and closing in front of the party, so the fire like whooshes onto the stone walls, and the party is now safe behind this door, but now they've got to think, well, do we go back and try and swim through that flooded cavern, or do we carry on ahead and face this dragon that we now know is there and is really super dangerous? What do we do? Where do we go? This kind of thinking is good, and that's the fun part of role-playing games and Dungeons & Dragons. It's thought experiments. It's trying to work your way out of a puzzle. You are in a puzzle instead of just being abstracted from it. And that's where a lot of the challenge actually comes in. To defeat a monster, you need to think tactically. In the absence of tactics, challenge ratings come in. Challenge ratings seem to take into account if you just have a fighter on one side and a creature on another, and they are allowed to use all of their abilities, how many hit points are going to disappear before one of them falls over dead. And that seems to be challenge rating. And that is not how fights should go down in role-playing games, because you are trying to simulate life in some fashion. You're either going to try and simulate real gritty life, where people will avoid fights at all times because it's really dangerous and you can get hurt, and you would only go into a fight if you had a reason to do so, a motivation for getting into a fight. Otherwise, you are completely foolish. Or you've got some superhero high fantasy type thing, where you are a brazen warrior bred for combat and you just fight all these evil enemies wherever you go. You are this undead hunter fighting hordes of skeletons and zombies in this tower, and so you just dive in because you need to kill these things, you need to destroy them. So yeah, you dive in and do all this stuff, and you've got fancy moves. You can skip over their heads and get to the other side and stab them in the back. Those are good things to do as well. But this all relies on your specific combat abilities. There are ways to get around these things very, very easily. A first level wizard could fight a challenge rating 8 Tyrannosaurus Rex and win without drawing any blood. And that's an oddity that shows that the challenge rating system is not robust enough to handle all situations. The first level wizard example is the animal friendship spell. Within the span of 6 seconds, as long as you are within 30 feet and you offer a scrap of food, that creature is then charmed. It needs to save its wisdom saving throw, which for a Tyrannosaurus Rex is not that good, and so a first level wizard with not that good a save DC will have a decent chance of overcoming it. It's a very low intelligence, like intelligence 2 or 3 creature, and so it doesn't reach the intelligence 4 or higher threshold for no longer being susceptible to the animal friendship spell. It is then charmed for 8 hours, or 24 hours, one of the two, For a number of hours, that creature is charmed, so it cannot attack you, cannot take any action against you, and it will obey simple commands, so long as it doesn't put it in danger. It is your friend. You've basically got a limited time T-Rex companion from a situation where the strict letters of the rules say that that should be something that should kill that wizard outright. That is the way challenge system works, the challenge rating system works, and it's not a system that I support using because it has all these caveats and exceptions. So much so that it makes it almost useless. With that having been said, the challenge rating system is a system of rules that a group of people spent a lot of time designing, and so it has merit. To find the merit, you need to just do a surface reading of the rules. So from 3rd edition Dungeons & Dragons all the way to 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, if you just look at the challenge ratings of the monsters, this is for if you are having a straight 1-to-1 fight with a monster. And if you are in a group with diverse skills and you have reached certain thresholds that are recommended but not essential, then you will have a decent chance of overcoming this challenge if it comes down to a fight. Since challenge ratings are near useless when you're not in a fight, if you want to throw particular creatures with particular abilities into your game so that the players can interact with them and not necessarily fight them, if you want to introduce this as something that if the characters are given the opportunity to find out more about this thing before a fight erupts, that it would give them pause and make them consider not fighting someone or something because they know how difficult it is as characters. That is good. That isn't metagaming. That is playing the game. So as a Dungeon Master, you introduce an ancient red dragon has the title deed for some land or something, or a magical item that the town needs. And so the town says, hey, we'll pay you handsomely if you go and get this thing from the red dragon. It's like, oh, it's a big red dragon. This is going to be scary. Sneaking in, getting past all the guards and things. Can't be any challenge rating. Get in, meet the dragon, and now you have to talk to the dragon or steal from the dragon. Fighting the dragon is a bad idea, but you can do it. Another thing that the older editions of Dungeons & Dragons knew of and newer versions of Dungeons & Dragons ignore is that when you're dealing with that level of civilization and technology, this sort of medieval period, Renaissance period, warfare and weaponry, one thing that often gets lost is the fact that you would have huge teams of people behind you. The idea of hiring retainers and hiring support staff for your caravan as you travel north to the mountains. The idea of having people to take care of your weapons and your armor and your horses while you're busy inside, but also hiring basic militiamen to aid you in fighting. You as a player character in the earlier versions of Dungeons & Dragons were not designed to deal with every situation on your own. This was meant to be something that was enjoyed by people who were fans of reading, and so read a lot of history books that were recommended at the back of the Dungeons & Dragons book and mentioned at the beginning of the Dungeons & Dragons Player's Handbook. They give you the resources to say, people didn't go into these things alone. You are not supposed to go into these things alone. And so if just you and your couple of friends sneak into the dragon's hoard, your aim is to get in, get the thing, and get out. If the dragon wakes up and wants to fight, you run. That's the logical thing to do. You don't just stand there and fight and hope to win because the Dungeon Master wouldn't have put you in a dangerous situation. You put yourself in the dangerous situation. The Dungeon Master presented a scenario, and this was the way you chose to go about it. That is not to say that Dungeon Masters can't be dicks and put you in situations that you are entirely unprepared for. Now, this could be that they are genuinely being capricious and trying to trick you into situations so that you feel bad and they feel good. They're like, oh, I tricked someone. Someone's being a douche, they're being a douche. Leave them to it. But other people might put their players into this situation without realizing it. And that way you get into social interactions. They might get defensive about it and defend their position so they come across as a dick and a douche, but they haven't actually done it on purpose. And they just haven't fully understood how they've presented the information in the first place. If you say that there's a magic item and you don't tell them there's a dragon protecting it, that is fine. But if they get there and all the exits are now cut off and there's a dragon, there is no way for the players to get out, and all their investigations come up for naught, what are they supposed to learn from this? To never go into a situation? Now, if they'd done their research and there was no clue that things were different from their research, no clue at all for them to be cautious, if they were confident that they'd done all the right things, performing this reversal is not fun. If you'd allow them to do all this research and like, yep, this is a cavern, there are these traps here because we found this book talking about this trap maker who did traps in that region around this time, these are the kind of traps that he did, this is where on the maps that we've got they would likely be placed thanks to my insight check that I did, or my architecture knowledge. These would be the likely places for them, so that's the information that we've got. We know that the best place for the magic item is here. We also know that there's a secret compartment here, so it could be in either of these two places. We know where to go and how to do it, and there's likely a dragon protecting it, given that there's been dragon sightings in the area and this is the only sizable location. So we've made the right checks and spoken to the right people to get the right information. The information's all here. They go in through the front door and all of a sudden they're in an inside jungle wilderness. It's another plane of existence. All of their plans are completely gone for naught, and they're now being chased by a dragon tiger that breathes snakes at people. Like, that kind of reversal only pays off if you've got a good payoff in mind. Like, if it's like a result of this magic item doing this sort of thing, and it's something that they could have learned but didn't, and there was maybe some clue to it. Like, for something to be enjoyable for people, it needs to be familiar. That is why people knocking on your door and trying to sell you things isn't so nice. But if someone knocks on your door and asks you for a small thing, like hi, we just wanted to know if you would like a sticker. And you're like, okay, yeah, and you get a sticker. So they've asked you something, so it feels like you're giving something to them, but they are giving you something, and so you get a reward, bunch of hormones. If they come back a week later and say, hey, can we take some photographs of your garden? That's a little bit intrusive, but you've already said yes to them once for a small thing, and psychologically that means that you're statistically more likely, statistically it means that you are more likely to accept this second more personal request, and they can keep ramping it up because it seems familiar, and your brain is basically psychologically going, oh, well, we said yes, so let's be consistent and say yes. There will be points where other factors come into play, and in fact other factors come into play all the time, but these other factors come in and say to you that, well, hold on, I'm very protective of my back garden, and I'm going to create the separation just now of, yes, I said yes to this sticker, but to me a sticker is a sticker, not an agreement between the two of us. And so you asking to access my garden, I'm going to say no. That is a reasonable response, but so is, well, I said yes to the sticker, I haven't been killed yet, this seems like a safe person, so whatever they want to do, it might be safe, so I'll let you in. So the creation of context, the creation of precedent, helps people accept things. It's just human nature. And so you are running the game for humans. You need to lay the groundwork for things. So if this magical item is supposed to create this strange internal jungle snake scape with snake breathing tiger dragons, which I don't know why that came to mind, but let's stick with it. you need to have some sort of precedent for weird stories around the magic item, at least. If not something more specific, like it has ties to a Fey realm or something, for the players to then go, make a connection, an explanation. Or if they were sent on this quest by a king that had gone, I'm trying to make this as many steps removed as I think is reasonable, as an example. So let's say they were sent on this mission by a king, and this king has reportedly been missing for a while and come back. And you've already established in another campaign, like same setting, same world, same characters, but you've established in another mission, another quest, another campaign, that there's a Fey trickster, doppelganger, shapeshifty type person who will abduct people and pretend to be them elsewhere for a while, or they'll take a while to take their shape, and there's an absence, and then they come back and start doing strange things, and it turns out to be this doppelganger. Either the players have come across him, or come across stories of him, or something, right? And then you've got this king thing, so you've already got a connection between these two things. Even if the players haven't made the connection, the dots are there, okay? Even if the dots haven't been joined, provide the dots. So, body snatching doppelganger takes some time to do things. So a clue for the doppelganging. A person of authority with a clue that matches the clue for the doppelganging. But you don't need to make it any more explicit than that. I think that's enough. And then that person sending them on a quest to go and get this thing. And this thing also having stories around it of being connected to a Fey realm. If everything else says it's in a dragon's hoard and there are these traps and things around about it, and they have fun researching that and everything, it would be nice to pay that off and give them that dungeon that they've spent so much time researching, but I would argue that it would be reasonable in this situation where you provided the dots to connect it and it's still interesting to contend with and it connects to something that they've done before. At that point, you could have them enter the dungeon and the whole world disappears and you're now in this Fey realm being chased by tiger dragons breathing snakes. And then once you've managed to get out of there, I'll leave the rest of it to you, you then manage to get the magic item, get out of the Fey realm, and uncover the fact that the king was this doppelganger, whether by unmasking him right there in the court, or confronting him privately in his chambers and going, by the way, the modus operandi seems to match this thing back here. It was you all along! Or the king's now disappeared, and an unconscious, tied and gagged real king has been found in a back room somewhere, and so it's clear that the players have been duped. And that can be the end of that campaign, that quest, that mission. And they need to then either deal with this magic item. What do they do with it? Is it cursed? Is this going to bring about calamity on the land? Why did the doppelganger king want it? Do they take it with them, or do they leave it with the kingdom? What does the kingdom want to do with it? Do they chase the doppelganger and try and find where he is, or is that going to be a loose end? Or are they going to chase it, come across a loose end, and find something else to get on with in the meantime? It leads on to another thing. So the point is, there isn't a challenge rating system for that. Like, I realise that this has gone off on a wild tangent, but there isn't a challenge rating system for that. There isn't a way to codify how difficult that is. That is simply a mental exercise to put the players through. But the important thing for that is consistency of some kind. So I hope that I've managed to put forward a decent argument for consistency in the first place. If a dragon's meant to be there, put a dragon there. If you don't put a dragon there, and you replace it with something entirely different, at least have the seeds of that can be connected later on. Otherwise, the players are not going to be receptive to it. Okay. Now, that doesn't mean that shots from the dark don't work at all, but in moderation. It needs to be involved in something that is familiar. So, let's say, for instance, you've set up none of this stuff. They get there, they're now in another realm of existence while looking for a magic item in a cave. why are they there? They are very likely to get distracted by, why are we here? Is this where we're supposed to be now for the rest of the game? Like, is this another world for us to explore? Do we stay here? Do we go back home? Like, what is our motivation here? And so what do we do? And then as a dungeon master, do you improvise things for them to do here if they are just sticking around here, trying to test the limits of what the boundaries are, what they're supposed to be doing, what they think they're supposed to be doing, if that's what they're looking for? If they are just bullishly charging ahead with the things that they want to do, are they being allowed to do so? Are you supporting that as a dungeon master? And if they manage to find their way to the magic item, how do they get out? Do they know that they can get out? Like, is this another realm of existence, or have they traveled through time? Like, if they've got no context for any of this, there are so many theories that could go out there that the players, as well as the characters, can get very confused and not be sure what to do. The recourse might be to try something rash, like smash the magic item. And if you've already established in your head that this is going to be a status quo world, I'm not going to change anything for them, and I've not dropped any clues, and now they've smashed this item that I have decided arbitrarily that this is the only way back home. They are now trapped in a world where you haven't prepared anything, and it's just because they didn't read your mind and work out what it is that you're trying to do. Leave clues. Leave breadcrumbs. That is storytelling. It's leaving clues. There was a thing with, was it Tom Clancy or no, James Patterson. James Patterson basically pointing out that in any story, especially when when it's a crime story specifically, whenever you have a character introduced a second time, and the second time they are introduced, or the first time they are introduced, there was no reason for them to be there. The scene or the story could have progressed without them being there. That is your person. That is a person of interest. 9 times out of 10, that's the real killer in a murder mystery. Okay? So, if you're watching an episode of Castle, or... Is Castle still on? I think Castle's been cancelled. I don't know. I haven't seen Castle in a long time. But yeah, if you're watching Castle, or CSI, or... NCIS or anything like that, if you want to work out who the person is that's done it, watch the first 10 minutes. If the wife gets brought in and she's in a genuine grieving scene and they're like, sorry, your husband's dead, is there anything that you can tell us? And she points them towards like brother-in-law or something, and they go and visit the brother-in-law, and then she turns up again later and it's like, oh, I found my husband's watch, maybe it'll give you another clue. There was no reason for her to be there. The story could have progressed with another detective saying, oh, the wife handed this in. You see what I mean? There's no reason that someone else could not have filled in that spot. That it couldn't have been left on the desk with a note saying, oh, I found this. Or no reason it couldn't have been introduced earlier. The character's been introduced a second time, and that is just a narrative contrivance that has been developed over decades, and for some people it is unintentional because they recognize that they need to have a character introduced more than once for them to be considered important in any way, and so it's in the audience's mind. And so the players in your game will be your audience. So you need to introduce a concept and you need to reinforce a concept before you execute the concept. Don't introduce the grieving widow and then not have her mentioned again, not have anything to do with it, and then it was her all along. That's a bit too much to swallow. Whereas if you introduce her and then have to reintroduce her for some reason, even if that function could have been performed by someone else, that would be sufficient to reinforce in people's subconscious that there is something about her, but without revealing that it's her as the person of interest that they are trying to capture. It's not going to tip the hat too much. It's not going to reveal too much. Some of you watching this may not have recognized that that's what's been going on in all these crime week by week programs, but I can't watch them anymore because it's now fairly obvious to me who the killer is. It's either the celebrity cameo or the person that's been introduced twice without a need to be, and it's Still fun to see how they get there. It's like Columbo would show you the murderer straight away, and it would be like how Columbo worked it out. That was really fun and engaging. So it still is fun now that you know this. But yeah, it's interesting. Anyway. So yeah, we've covered quite a bit. I also feel like it hasn't been quite as focused as I wanted it to be. But that's kind of the point, is that challenge rating and the rules governing how to build what they call encounters, basically just things that happen in the game. It's not as cut and dried as all that. You can put anything anywhere so long as you handle it in a reasonable way. How you handle it in a reasonable way is an entirely different topic, but just consider it. If you are starting out, if you are brand new to Dungeons & Dragons, stick with the challenge ratings. You will not go far wrong. If you stick with the challenge ratings, you will ensure that you won't slaughter the entire party by accident 99 times out of 100. Okay? They are balanced for combat. But if you introduce a high challenge rating encounter and the party figures out some quick way to get around it, like, oh, there's a beholder on the other side of the door. Well, how about we just open the door, everyone hold their action until I've opened the door, all these shots fire off during my action, and then I close the door, or someone else closes the door if you're really strict with action economy and what you can do in an action. Even though opening a door in 5th edition, they're quite clearly, it's under the like drawing a weapon thing, it's something that you can do as part of another action, or like as a bonus action, or as a reaction, or one of these things. So within 6 seconds, you can open a door and close a door. That is a reasonable thing to expect, and so regardless of action economy and the strict letters of the rules, that should be allowable. 2 players, one opening the door and the other one closing it, another 4 people in the corridor with bows and spells at the ready, fire them at the beholder. The beholder's got no hands. Like, yeah, they could try and attack the door, but you've found a way to, at least for a round, avoid getting hit. If you could just find some way of repeating that, rinse and repeat, you have slaughtered a creature that may be ratings and ratings above the challenge rating level that you should be able to fight against, but you found a tactic that works. So how does that meet out? It doesn't. So allow them to strategically think around your challenges. That's part of the fun of it. It's using your brain. But don't feel bad if a challenge rating developed encounter doesn't work out. And if you are feeling brazen enough, if you think that you have enough experience of the people that you're playing with, and or people in general, and the rules that you are playing with, and you have a rough idea of how difficult something might be, again, not in the challenge rating sense, but just how people react to certain things. Like if they see that someone can turn something to stone, is their immediate reaction to bolt for the door? If so, might be good to just kind of like stick one of those in there or something that they're not meant to fight, but just get them. It's knowing your players, knowing how they're going to react to things, and knowing what you think would make a good element to the story, and knowing how people psychologically respond to certain stimuli. There will be outliers, absolutely. Psychology is not a hard science, it's a soft science, because there are so many exceptions and caveats, and so many things that we need to work out to make it a hard science, that we're not there yet. But pay a lot of attention to it. Read up on human psychology, read up on history, so that you have a better understanding of how things have been done historically in the past, given the technology and the culture of the time, to understand that our modern way of thinking about things is not necessarily the way it would be done. In modern times, we're very postmodern. We are deconstructivist by nature. So we would analyze a situation, and part of our culture is to take it apart and see what the components are and see what makes the situation, which is one of the reasons why simulations are so prevalent these days in role-playing games and tactical war games and computer games, because we're able to take things apart and put them back together again in a conceptual sense. Our ability to separate object and subject is an amazing feature of our human brains. And the fact that we're able to do this and take bits apart as well and analyze them as objects and subjects, just, it's so good. Use your brain, your beautiful brain, use it. And start taking bits apart and looking at them and examining them. If you've got a ghost and it can go through walls, that's cool. What can you do with that? What can be done? What can be done to defeat it? You might even want to modify some things about the monster, like you cannot defeat a ghost without X substance, the phlebotinum, the unobtainium, a ghostbuster gun. You might need a special focusing crystal. You might need to find a specific shaman in the woods. Take television programs, for example. Television programs, especially when they deal with sci-fi and fantasy components, will do a thing where in the course of the television program, they will, if they have a finite idea of something, it will almost definitely happen. If they don't have a finite idea and it's just like an episodic show like Stargate SG-1 started off as, then they will introduce elements and then just want to reintroduce them later to introduce consistency. But basically, the point is, they will introduce a concept such as, this thing needs to be dealt with, and the only thing that the characters in the situation know about or find out about is that it can be counteracted by this thing. And as far as they're concerned, as far as they know, this is the only thing that can fix it. And so to defeat the ghost, you need the skull of its father, say, if you want to just come up with an arbitrary thing, or a tool that it used in life, or just a general purple crystal dug up from the ground, or you need to wait until the third Saturday of the month and dance around a tree naked or something while screaming the ghost's name and it'll disappear because it's really embarrassed to be around you because you're acting like a nutter. You do that, the thing goes away. Later on in the season or series, depending on how long they wait, in television they would introduce this concept again, and it may be that it was a limited resource that they expended the first time around, so now they've got to find a different resource that can perform the same task. The question that very few people tend to ask is, why didn't they look for this other thing in the first place? Well, abstractly, an audience would understand that they've grown, they've learned more, they know more about things, and this also presents a new challenge for people because now they can go, okay, what do we do now that something's changed? So for instance, supernatural. Ghosts, you salt and burn the bodies and that's fine. And they introduce this concept, they find a ghost. There's a whole episode about the ghost doing all this crazy stuff, and then they finally find the body, dig it up, salt and burn the bones, and ghost disappears. Story over. Introduce ghosts later on, and all of a sudden the body is in a difficult to reach place, or they can't reach it at all, so how are they going to deal with this? And so instead they trap it in like a salt circle, bury it underground in some concrete, and now you've got a ghost that is trapped, and so the situation is diffused, but essentially it's been dealt with in a different way. And it's still there as a threat. It could come up again, hasn't so far. I'm slightly disappointed in the fact that Supernatural lays the seeds for some things and not others. Like some things are dropped as seeds and never brought up again. Like the half-demon child. Where is that half-demon child? You've got a Nephilim coming up in Supernatural right now. You've got a baby half-angel, child of Lucifer, and that is supposed to be like the super amazing thing that can warp and alter reality. We've already had that. The half-demon child that was from seasons and seasons ago, back when they fully planned everything out in the first 5 seasons. They introduced this concept. They eventually didn't deal with it. The kid turned out to be good. A half-demon child turned out to be a good kid and took himself out of the situation. He had completely reality warping capabilities, more so than this Nephilim has shown. And the Nephilim is half angel, not half demon. The demons are like pure evil. The angels are shown to have a version of free will, and so can choose to be good or bad like people. So why they're freaking out, I'm really concerned about. But that's one of the charms of the Supernatural television program, is that the characters are stupid. And that they don't learn. They keep finding themselves in this cycle. And they've sort of hand-waved it as it's because they were destined to be this way, sort of. Like, Cupids were tasked with finding John and Mary Winchester and making them have kids, because those kids would, given the situation that has been orchestrated by everyone, they would be raised in a certain way, think certain things, feel certain things, and so, like, Sam would feel some abandonment and separation, and would have all these supernatural abilities that Lucifer could then make use of, and it would be easier for him to take over the body. And Dean would feel a certain way and have this sense of heroism and stuff that the Archangel Michael would embody and go, hey, this suits and fits like a glove. So that they've orchestrated things to be in a set way, so that the brothers would find themselves in this continuous repetitive cycle of needing each other and being close brothers, but also maintaining their personality traits. So that's been ingrained into them. So after that storyline had resolved, they're still left with, this is their background, this is their character. So them moving on like that is fine to me. I'm fine with that. But still, someone's got to remember that there's this half-demon kid that can alter reality to suit his whims and teleport about the place better than angels can. And so maybe put the word out, get a message to him and be like, look, dude, can you come over and calm everyone else down and show people that this Nephilim will just be however he's raised? Or use him to fight the Nephilim, if the Nephilim does turn out to be evil or manipulative. Like, where is this kid? Anyway, so introduce a concept such as ghosts and how to defeat them. And if you want to change your mind on how to defeat them, or you want to present a more difficult challenge, but you think you've introduced this in a limited resource kind of way, like, a Tarrasque, only one in the entire world. You've defeated it. Well, what about clones of Tarrasques, or baby Tarrasques, or Tarrasques from other dimensions? There are ways around it. And to defeat a Tarrasque, maybe you needed to kill the last unicorn and use its blood. But now all the unicorn blood's gone, and now you've got all these clones of Tarrasques running around. How do you deal with it? TV show logic, drama logic, things that will be ingrained in popular culture that people would understand and pick up, and so they are readily able to understand it when you introduce this concept. Something new. So it might be a good idea to work off the players during this sort of situation and go, okay, if they think, well, unicorn blood worked, will another type of blood work? Let's do some research. What's similarly related to unicorns? Or can we synthesize unicorn blood? Can we go back in time and get some more unicorn blood? Basically, they will, hopefully, if they're thinking, will come up with a few different solutions for you if you haven't come up with one yourself. And you could just pick the best one out of their general discussion as characters talking to each other and go, yeah, that one. Let's start laying some seeds for that. Or think of, what have I already laid seeds for? What would make sense? What can I have placed that would become a dot in this dot to dot? If you were to join it all up, it would sort of make sense. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm going to leave it, actually. So basically, it's okay to do all sorts of things, and you don't need to keep things to the challenge rating. There are ways to get around things, so it doesn't need to be direct combat. You can have special things to get around a certain thing, like a temporary magic stone that stuns red dragons if you need to go and find that artifact or something. So there can be ways around super powerful creatures and situations, and even if you don't put those things in place, players don't need to attack them head on. And so the challenge rating system is very much a guideline if you are going down the tactical combat route. But if you are going purely the tactical combat route, all of these options that we've just discussed are not going to be as forthcoming to you. They're going to be more difficult to encounter because of the difference in mindset from a grid-based tactical combat game to you can now suddenly do anything in your imagination. And that's the difference between D&D and HeroClix. Or Mage Knight, if you wanted to stick with the fantasy theme. That's the difference. That's what makes role-playing games in general, and Dungeons & Dragons specifically, superior to those experiences, because it's in the realm of the imagination. It is problem-solving at its best. It is practical problem-solving. If you are a philosophy student, or you are interested in philosophy, or paradoxes, Dungeons & Dragons, man. Seriously. If you're a teacher, and I'm probably going to either edit this or refilm this as a separate thing, because I think this is very important. If you're a teacher and you're trying to think of a way to introduce abstract thought to people, or how to solve certain puzzles to people, if you've got a brain teaser that you're trying to put across to people and how they might solve it, rather than putting it entirely in the abstract, give them a simulation to work through. Let's say, for instance, and this is something that I've already got planned for introducing in my play-by-post, so hopefully my guys aren't watching this, and if they are, spoilers. But I plan to have a meteor strike. And as part of the podcast where I spoke to other people, this is planning to be titanium that's struck the Earth, and this is going to be the only pure titanium that people know about. So it's a sizable chunk. It can be used to make magic weapons, and it's something that people are going to fight over. So this meteor strikes, massive crater. It's now underground in an underground cave system, and they need to go and find it. And when they get there, other people have been fighting over it for a little while now. By the time the players get there, like, other people have been fighting over it, and they are struggling to negotiate. And they are now at this standstill where they have a magical beam or a laser cutting device or something, or they've got some means of producing a straight line cut through this orb, this sphere of titanium, to equally distribute it. The puzzle is that they have 3 uses of this thing, and 3 uses only. And for the amount of time that you have for the players, before all-out war erupts, they do not have the time to find another solution. So don't think of another solution, don't give another solution. This is the scenario. They are in this room, they have a set amount of time to come up with a solution, and they need to negotiate with other people, but it all essentially boils down to, you need to split this into 8 pieces. How do you turn a sphere into 8 pieces, making only 3 cuts? And this is an actual puzzle. This is like a maths puzzle. And it's interesting because it has a solution. There is a way to do it. And if the players know how to solve it, hopefully they don't let their characters know. Excuse me. So they don't tell themselves how to do it. They sort of work through it and allow the other players to have some fun trying to puzzle it out. But if everyone at the table already knows how to do it, then that makes it a bit more difficult. It's fun if you don't know how it works. But it's essentially how to solve this puzzle is you start off with a sphere, you make 1 vertical cut. You now have 2 hemispheres. You stick them back together and you rotate it, so you've got that vertical horizontal line, and you cut it again, so now you've got 4 pieces that are quarter spheres, and then you turn it on that axis, so now you've got these lines kind of going across like that, and you do another vertical cut, and so now those 4 pieces have all been cut in half, and you've got 8 equal pieces. That would be how to solve that puzzle. But rather than just sit around the table with your mates over drinks and go, I came across this interesting puzzle. Do you guys know how to cut an orange into 8 pieces or an apple into 8 pieces, making only 3 cuts? It's like, why are you limited to only 3 cuts? What arbitrary situation would you find yourself in where you have a knife that can only cut 3 times? Hence Dungeons & Dragons. It's a fun way to introduce these kind of thought experiments and puzzles and games into a situation where you could make it seem sort of realistic, where it could sort of happen the way it's being described. And so that is what I present to you. So in an hour, we have covered challenge ratings are not the be-all and end-all, and use your imagination, and puzzles are fun. So there are other things to do apart from going up and bashing people in the face and taking their stuff. You can have fun adventures and fun experiences, and you can get around massive dragons without being of the right power level or character level, or without their challenge rating being dropped and subsequent hit points and damage done and stuff. There are ways to get around it. You can fudge and hand wave and have things happen to mitigate problems, or you could lay the seeds beforehand and just let the chips fall where they may. You can alter things, but so long as you've placed some sort of clues that things can be altered, and make sure that you have a few surprises, but that you've laid the seeds and groundwork there, because people only like things that are familiar to them already. They don't like brand new things. So if you present a completely understandable situation and introduce one new element that's a bit of a shock, that's fine. If you suddenly upend the entire situation and it's all brand new, and suddenly from going to a king's castle to negotiate a ransom for another king, you suddenly find yourself on a storm-tossed pirate ship fighting a kraken. Why are you there? What's the point? And if there's no explanation forthcoming and it makes absolutely no sense and the people aren't interested in this completely flipped mystery, don't do it. Yeah, I think this was pretty good. Pretty good. I'm liking this. It's cool. Another thing is, I'm not nuts, but I've also got some puppets. Hi, and I'm awesome at ventriloquism. Hello. So, yeah, I'm not good at ventriloquism at all, but I like this. This is Spank the monkey, and he is a bit of a ladies' man. And I have been looking forward to using him to DM for a while. So I've got one funny session planned at some point where instead of me being on the camera GMing over Skype, or me being in person GMing in person, I will use Spike for a wacky, zany session. And now that I have lost your interest, bye-bye.